Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
From the BBC World Service.
These attackers have no fear.
They would have killed me had they found out.
It was really intense.
I just saw the entire financial markets grinding to a halt.
This is what they've stolen.
So many millions of dollars.
Oh, it's got to be North Korea.
There was chaos.
What do you mean they've disappeared?
It was almost like a perfect crime.
Where did they get the money?
How in the world did this happen?
The Lazarus Heist from the BBC World Service. Coming soon.
Hello, I'm Kim Chakanetsa, and welcome to The Conversation, the programme that brings together two women from different cultures with a shared passion or profession. Today, we're talking about insects. These endlessly fascinating creatures have been around for more than 350 million years, longer than dinosaurs and flowering plants, and we are vastly outnumbered by them. There are approximately 1.4 billion insects for every person on Earth. But we tend to treat insects with disdain, swatting them away and avoiding them altogether. But they are absolutely essential to our survival and deserve our curiosity. With me today to talk all things buzzing, crawling and flying are two insect enthusiasts who have made a career out of their love for bugs. Dr. Jessica Ware is an entomologist. She's the Associate Curator in Invertebrate Zoology at the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the Vice President of the Entomological Society of America, the world's largest organization of that kind. And Dr. Carolina Bahia-Muri is a vector biologist. She heads the Mosquito Immunity and Vector Competence Section at the National Institutes of Health, one of the world's foremost medical research centers. She's originally from Guatemala and she's now joining us from Silver Spring in the US. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for having me.
Jessica, if you were to introduce yourself to someone new, let's say at a party, and if you told them that you study insects, how do people react?
Well, it depends on the type of insect I talk about. If I say I'm an entomologist and I study dragonflies and damselflies, usually people are excited and they tell me a story about how a dragonfly landed on their arm once when they were fishing or swimming or in a canoe. If I say I study termites or I study cockroaches, people usually kind of clutch their pearls and take a step back and say, Oh, interesting. Why would you do that? So I think it really depends on the insect that I bring up.
Carolina, with mosquitoes, what's the reaction to that?
Well, I think that depends who I'm talking to, right? When I'm talking to colleagues from medical school, when I went to Guatemala, they asked me, how did you end up with mosquitoes after going to med school? But for most people, it's like, how can we get rid of them? I have mosquitoes in my backyard and they're a nuisance. And why don't we just get rid of all mosquitoes?
Right. And we'll come to that a bit later in the program. Now, Jessica, as you said, you're an expert in damselflies and dragonflies. Can you describe them for me and tell me maybe one or two things that's really interesting about them?
Sure. They're colorful, charismatic insects that we often find near fresh water, but they're also voracious predators. So they're really good at controlling, actually, mosquitoes. So they're good at eating the things that plague us. So if you are someone who doesn't want to have mosquitoes around, bring dragonflies into your life is what I would say, because dragonflies and damselflies do a really good job at reducing the numbers of mosquitoes. And oh my goodness, so their reproductive biology is fascinating. So males actually have two penises. They have a penis at the tip of their abdomen and then a secondary penis at the base of their abdomen. And the reason why they have this kind of complicated structure isn't totally understood. But what we know is that females and males can mate multiple times. And females have the remarkable ability of storing sperm for later. And she can choose which sperm to use to fertilize her eggs. But of course, males want to ensure paternity, right? So males actually have evolved over, hundreds of millions of years, these adaptations on the secondary penis to actually displace the previous male sperm. So it's this kind of arms race where females have evolved kind of this choice, and then males have evolved this strategy. So when we think about dragonflies and damselflies, there's really an infinite number of things one could study, which is part of why I like studying them, because every day is a different topic.
Carolina, it's clear to me why Jessica is fascinated by dragonflies and damselflies. But you study mosquitoes, and I have to say, hands down, the most annoying insects in the world, according to me. And also, one of the most dangerous because obviously they carry diseases like malaria. But tell me why you're studying mosquitoes. Where is the heart of your fascination?
Yeah, I think that, one of the reasons I study them is because they're so important for human health, right? But when you think about their biology, it's really fascinating. For example, only females bite. They ingest 2.5 times their body weight in blood.
Wow.
That is like eating a 250-pound hamburger in one go. And then within 48 hours, right, they digested this meal. And one day later, they're ready to lay 50 to 100 eggs. So when you think about it metabolically, it's amazing. When you compare these numbers with humans, we could never do something like that.
So Carolina, do you feel that mosquitoes have a bit of a PR problem and don't fully deserve their bad reputation?
Yeah, I would say, of the mosquito species, about 94% of them don't cause any harm. Right? They can be annoying, but they don't transmit any diseases. The thing is, the ones that cause trouble become famous, so they're the ones we hear about. So I think the problem comes with the interactions with humans, and then when mosquitoes also adapt to urban areas, and some of them have been very good colonizing urban areas, so they really cause havoc. So I do think it's a matter of finding a balance, right, between them and us, and I think even if we wanted to eliminate them, I don't think it's possible. They were biting dinosaurs already, right, 100 million years ago. So I think they'll be here even after we're gone. I think they will outlive us. That's my feeling.
So, Carolina, if it's 2 a.m. in the morning and there's a mosquito circling your ear, you still don't get terribly annoyed by them?
Oh, yes, I do. And I kill them. But it's fascinating what they can accomplish. When you think about it, it's like a little drone that is so small, but it has a digestive system, an immune system, a circulatory system. It's like a little whole world, but simplified. And there are many parallels because all insects are made of the same parts as all life. So we can think of them like the beginner Lego set for children, and then we are like the big box. But by understanding how the little Lego works, you can get very deep understanding of where we come from. And at a molecular level, we are very similar.
Got it. Okay. Now, historically, there have been some extraordinary women in entomology compared to other scientific disciplines. For example, Maria Sibylla Merian, whose work in the 17th century was incredibly influential. Do you think, Jessica, there's something about entomology that makes it more accessible to women?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily makes it more accessible. And some could argue that actually the numbers of female entomologists are much lower than they should be. I know that in the past there was a trend, for women to have accessible entomology because they could create these cabinets of curiosities. And they would go out, into the natural world. And it was a very acceptable thing to do drawings and paintings. And many women who were early biological illustrators that did still life or other types of landscape paintings had insects as part of their observations. And then in the cabinets of curiosities, many of them were insect finds that were in these cabinets. But then, certainly in the 20th century and beyond, the numbers of women that were going into entomology, it has not stayed high. And when we look across kind of the diversity of people who are in entomology, it's not reflecting what we would expect based on human, populations. So although I think that, entomology is for everybody and inherently, curiosity and interest in the natural world is something that all humans have in common, regardless of where you are in the gender spectrum. I just think that there's some systemic practices that maybe have prevented full, broad participation by women in our field.
Okay. Carolina, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. In terms of women in the field, what have you seen? What has been your experience?
Yes, I think even today it's dominated by males, especially in the field. When you think about field entomologists, I think there's an underrepresentation of females, let's put it this way. Early in the careers, you see a relatively large number of females, but as you move up in the academic degrees, as you get to be a principal investigator or professor or associate professor, the number of females drops. There are many reasons. Part of it is that I think the critical, tenure type aspect of the career coincides with the limits of being able to have a family or not for women. And I think even nowadays, although there's more flexibility, this is something that has not been resolved. You know, I'm a member of the National Academy, and I always noticed that the previous generation, most of them did not have a family. The price of being a scientist was to not have children. And my generation, we're trying to deal with both. I have one daughter, but it is not easy to balance. So I think we need to make programs that are more sustainable and give more flexibility to women so that they should not be penalized for raising a family. I don't know what you think, Jessica.
I think the same. I mean, I had children when I was in graduate school, and it did seem like perhaps the field of academia in general is designed for someone who's a man who has a wife at home who could do a lot of the chores. And so if you don't have that, then it can be a bit of a challenge. But then also I noticed time and again, many of my colleagues who are not men were asked to do a lot more service, and they kind of had these additional burdens. So we need to make sure that women have, time to get the work done that they need to do, time devoted to research, that when they get invited to give a talk, it's on their research, the way that their male colleagues are invited to give a talk on their research, rather than giving a talk on what it's like to be a woman in science. As sometimes a lot of us get asked to do a lot more service type talks or outreach type talks rather than research talks. It doesn't get counted in the same way when being considered for promotion and tenure.
Okay, so given these stumbling blocks that you have pointed out, so what can be done to keep women in the field? I'll start with you, Jessica, maybe.
Recruitment, retention, and advocacy. I think we should take a multi-pronged approach. There's work that needs to be done at all levels. There's work that needs to be done recruiting women, and then really kind of changing, as Carolina was mentioning, kind of changing the timeline or being a bit more flexible with the timeline. And then I think that there's some systemic practices of the way that we do field work. I'm a field biologist. I go to the field for weeks at a time, and that can be very challenging for a variety of reasons. But there's also safety issues that go along with being a woman in the field. And it's not just for women. I mean, members of the LGBTQ community or people of color in general, people with different intersectional identities, might face more bias or discrimination when they're in the field. As a Black woman, I've experienced some racial bias when in the field. Unfortunately, there is the trend of sexual harassment. And so many of us have been trying to work on best practices to create safe work environments for our students in the field. We function as scientists in broader society, and society has a problem with violence against women. And so there's no reason to think that as scientists we would be immune to that.
And I wonder, Jessica, so when you're in the field, are there any precautions that you take generally?
And there is safety in numbers. We always have a buddy system, and people go in groups. We try and, vet people before we send people to a colleague's lab. We kind of make sure that there's, going to be a safe environment to send students to. And then we advocate for kind of mentoring, best mentoring practices. There's lots of mentoring training that can be done.
Carolina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very important to change the culture. And I think that giving both maternity and paternity leave will be important so that male colleagues also get involved with their families. The other thing is when you have underrepresented groups, retention is difficult because if you're the only one that is different, there's a part of you that feels you don't belong there, right? For instance, I've been at NIH in my department for 17 years now. And I'm the only tenured female in my department.
Wow.
And that is changing, but it takes time. So now NIH is making a strong effort. And when they recruit minorities, now we have a network of principal investigators that form support groups for all minorities within other departments. So we meet once a month and we discuss issues that come up and to create a community.
We are talking about insects, those tiny, curious creatures that keep the world running by feeding us and cleaning up our waste. My guests are two women who were bitten by the love for bugs. They are Dr. Jessica Ware, an entomologist based in New York, and Dr. Carolina Bahia Muri, a vector biologist who is originally from Guatemala. Well, let's talk a little bit about your backgrounds. Now, Carolina, you were the fifth of 6 children. So how unusual was it for you as a young woman to choose a career in science?
When I was, going to college, I started each week I wanted to be something different. I like math, I like biology. I was a little nerdy. And then at some point I thought, okay, in Guatemala, the highest degree I could get in biology was medicine. And also I needed to start working soon. My father had passed away and my mother was supporting all of us. So I felt compelled to, go to college and be able to get a job. And I thought, okay, medical doctor seems like a good job. But as part of that, I had to do first a pre-med in a university that really emphasized basic science. And I fell in love with basic science right there and then. And then I had to work in the National Institute of Nutrition of Central America and Panama. And there I met one of the few PhDs in the country. And as far as I know, the only one that was really doing research, and he was a biochemist. So he started teaching me. I just fell in love. I realized I'm a lab rat. I just love the lab. That's where I felt like fish in the water. And to me, that was like, okay, I can understand at a molecular level how my body works. So I would say what turns me on is molecular physiology, how molecules make a body work.
Right. And Jessica, as I understand that for you, it was your grandparents who sparked an interest and a love for insects.
Yes, absolutely. Gwen and Harold Irons, they were not trained in biology by any means, but they just kind of loved being outside, true Northern Canadian, nature lovers. And so they would take us for hikes kind of out in the bush and point out different things, help us pick up garter snakes and flip over logs to look for frogs and things like that. If my Nana had seen an insect, like a mosquito, Caroline, you'd be pleased to know she would not have just have swatted it away. She would have said, look at that insect. Isn't that interesting? It feeds on blood. Look at its wings. She pointed out the features that were beautiful about insects. Mm-hmm. And so then I had a very positive vibe, about insects. I thought of them as being interesting and beautiful and important, in terms of where they fit in the ecosystem.
Now, Carolina, you study the mosquito's immune system to understand how they transmit malaria. And even though in the lab the focus is, of course, on these insects, your overall vision is to help people. Where does that motivation, that drive come from?
Yes, I think, I grew up in Guatemala and I went to a Catholic school. It was called Monte Maria. It's a school from the Marino sisters. And they were in Guatemala for 25 years. And their goal was to achieve social change by educating females to be leaders. And, I think part of the program was that every Friday we would go and work with the poorest, orphans or the elderly or the blind. When I chose a career, I said I want to work in something I'm good at and that I love, but also something that I hope will contribute to leave the world a little bit better than it was before I went in.
And how does your research on malaria impact women in particular, Carolina?
Although in the last decades there's been strides and mortality has been reduced by half, still we have 410,000 deaths every year of malaria. And these are mostly children from sub-Saharan Africa. When you think about it, it affects everybody, but I think especially women, think that you have a child and the child is fine when it's an infant, but as soon as this child starts crawling and moving about, then every rainy season you have to wonder, when are they going to get sick? How sick are they going to get? Is this child going to survive? So I do think that if women could come into the rainy season without the fear of which of their children is going to die, who is going to make it, I cannot think of a more rewarding outcome of my work. And I don't know if I will solve the problem, but I may not be, the front of the building, but I might be foundation. I might leave all this knowledge, all this understanding, so other ones after me will build on it, and maybe they'll find a solution. I don't know if in my lifetime there will be time to solve such a big problem, but it's been going on for more than 30,000 years. So if I could put a foundation, I think I've done my job.
Jessica, why is entomology such an exciting field to be in?
Well, in part, just the sheer biodiversity of insects kind of behooves us to study them. So there's over 1 million species of insects that have been described, but we think that maybe there's 5 million or 30 million left to be described. So just thinking about sheer discovery, going out there and finding new species and describing new species. And then I think it's important to think about insects and the study of entomology as this broad discipline. It works on food security and protects our crops. 35% of the crops that we consume that are pollinated in large part by insects. The study of insects, as Carolina was mentioning, really impacts human health. And then when we think about just kind of understanding decomposition, understanding how habitats kind of function, without insects, the world would look very different. We don't often realize that when we step outside of our homes and we don't trip on every tree that's ever fallen down and or every body that's ever died, the reason why is thank you to insects, because they really do this service for us as decomposers. So entomology is just so broad, so vast. There's more entomology left to be done than has been done already, and we don't have enough people to do it. So it's exciting if you like the idea of discovery, if you like the idea of innovation and creativity. I think that's what turns me towards entomology, just because there's unlimited opportunity for discovery.
Excellent case for studying entomology. Now, Jessica, you also study termites and cockroaches, as you mentioned, and you discovered a species of cockroach that was new to New York City. Tell me about that.
Well, as long as there have been urban cities, there have been insects that have invaded them, because with transoceanic commerce, we're kind of constantly moving insects around as we ship things. And so this was no different. We have a cockroach that is now established in New York City that had been previously only found in parts of Asia, Japan. And so, New Yorkers, of course, groan at the idea of another cockroach, because there's several species of cockroaches that are already well established in the city that invade people's homes. It turns out that more people dislike cockroaches than I thought. I was kind of thinking, this is great. It's kind of bad because it's a new cockroach species, but this is great. People are going to be so excited to hear about the newest resident of Manhattan. No, not the case. People were pretty upset.
What were they saying? What sort of reactions were you getting about your exciting new discovery?
Well, it was kind of, people joked about it even on late night talk shows about this new pest that was arriving. And I think that people were kind of upset about the idea that these cockroaches have been shown in experimental data to thrive in icy conditions and in snow. And so I guess there was some concern that with these roaches, even in the winter, they could be able to go outside. And so I think that was a concern people had.
Got it. Understandable, though, resilient cockroaches. Now, Carolina, I suspect you've been asked this question before, but when you think about the future for mosquitoes, should we be trying to eradicate them, or should we try to work with them? What should our focus be on?
Well, I think it depends on which mosquito we're talking about. I think there are, I think Jessica will agree, there are invasive species like Aedes aegypti that came from Egypt and now is all over the world in urban areas. I think eradicating those from the city, I have no problem. Now, all mosquitoes in the planet, I don't think we can eliminate them, but if we could, I don't think it would be a good idea, because there's the source of food for a lot of other insects, right?
I would just say, as a dragonfly lover, I would say, hopefully, some of the thousands of species will be allowed to stay around as good dragonfly food.
Yes. So I think we have to transform them into good mosquitoes and control them, meaning not let the populations go crazy, right? And there's ways of doing it. Part of its behavior. There's some great, community engagement projects. There is one where they do these ovi traps, where mosquitoes love to lay eggs in tires, old tires. So they give you this half a tire, you hang it in your garden, and you give the mosquitoes a perfect place to lay the eggs. So then you can drain them every week, and you can destroy these larvae before they become adults and bite you. And people will learn about biology of insects and the metamorphosis and the stages. So I think there's very original ways of engaging the community and learn to live with mosquitoes so that they can have their life but not cause damage to us, right?
Got it. Now, Carolina, you said that training young scientists, many from developing countries, was one of the greatest accomplishments in your career. Why do you think bringing in women from different backgrounds can enrich the scientific community? Why is it so important to bring women from different backgrounds?
In Guatemala, we don't have a very strong social security. So social security is your family and the people around you. So you constantly try to, in my family, and I got it from my mother, constantly trying to see who needs help, who needs support. If you have some help at home, help them educate themselves. Send them to school, give them a chance, right? So you open doors for people as much as you can. I think that, people that come from different institutions and different backgrounds have a different way of thinking. So when you bring together people who have had very different trainings, very different backgrounds, it really creates a very rich environment. And there are many women from developing countries that are very good. I mean, in some countries, there's more females going into college nowadays. And I do think that maybe because I study malaria, which is a tropical disease, it particularly attracts people from developing countries where malaria is endemic. So once they come into the lab, then they join a lab where about half the people are from different underrepresented backgrounds, either female or Latin American. I think that being in this environment where it's okay, everybody looks funny, everybody speaks funny, everybody has an accent, then it's normal to be different. And I think that makes people feel very comfortable. And then I tell them, right, if we have to really strive for excellence, we have to show that we can do the absolutely best science possible. So we've had, during my career, a few publications in science, and most of those co-authors are from endemic areas. So in some of these papers, everyone came from an underrepresented group, or most authors, right? So I do think it's important. It's a way of showing we belong and we can strive and we can reach excellence if we work together, if we form a team. And I always tell them, you don't always succeed, but you need to focus not on being competitive, but being competent.
Carolina and Jessica, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I was talking to entomologist Jessica Ware and vector biologist Carolina Bahia Muri. If you're interested in hearing more about women in science, we have many episodes you can listen to. Take a trip to South America to meet the conservationists fighting to protect some of the world's most precious ecosystems, or find out how sewage systems work with 2 engineers working behind the scenes to keep our cities safe and healthy. You can find all these stories on BBC Sounds or wherever you find your podcasts. Just search for The Conversation. I'm Kim Chakaneta. Till next time.